We have Peter Morrison here and Carolyn Frey. They're going to talk about the Nantucket data platform. Lots of interesting information. A little background on each of them. Peter is retired from the RAND Corporation, and he was the founding director of the RAND Population Research Center. He's taught at the RAND Graduate School, Helsinki School of Economics, and the University of Pennsylvania. He now serves as an advisor to Worcester Polytech Institute, student teams who conduct research projects here on Nantucket every year. And Peter currently serves as a co-president of the Nantucket Civic League, as a director of the Nantucket Shellfish Association, and on the town's Visitors Service Advisory Committee. He graduated from Dartmouth College and holds a PhD in sociology from Brown University. Carolyn Frey received her law degree from the University of Oxford and got licensed to practice in the state of New York. She went on to complete a master's in law and economics, spending time at academic institutions in Hamburg, Bologna, and Mumbai. She then spent 3 years at Bridgewater Associates, a hedge fund in Connecticut. She moved to the island this past June to join the Nantucket Data Platform as its senior project manager. So we welcome them. They have great information.
Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. This is a great small group that I get to talk to and tell you about some of the stuff I work on. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are under age 78? Raise your hand. That's great. I'm so excited because I love to share what I do. I'm 78. I love to share what I work on with younger audiences like this. What I'm going to do is share with you some of my insights into Nantucket's population, insights that I have gained over the years of living here since 2005 and coming out of a background where I was a demographer. Do you all know what a demographer is, by the way? Anybody know? Demographers study population trends, right? Okay, and I like to say a demographer is someone who works a lot with numbers, but didn't have enough personality to become an accountant. So that's my favorite line. I wanted to start out with about 5 minutes of just kind of giving you some background on what I'm going to show you on the screen here. There's a distinction between Nantucket's native-born residents and those of us like me who moved here, who are known as wash-ashores. And I'd like you to take a moment to think about what's behind that kind of distinction. How many of you are wash-ashores? Raise your hand. All right. Most of you are, and a few of you, I suspect, are natives, right? Raise your hands. Okay. The wash-ashores among us, who are most of you here today, arrived here by virtue of a conscious choice, okay? And those of you who are native-born Nantucketers, raise your hand again. You are here through the lottery of birth. There wasn't a choice, not by you. This is where you were born, okay? Now just pause for a moment and think about what that kind of a distinction means. Many of us began, as I did, as a seasonal resident. Started out coming here for a few weeks of the fall with my wife each September in the off season. And looking back on it now, I realized that what happened was that we, the two of us and others like you, underwent a process of becoming kind of attached to Nantucket. You may not have realized it at the time. And we were kind of like people on a conveyor belt that came and went every year, came back again, went away, came back again. And then there came the year when you stumbled off the conveyor belt and you made a choice to become a full-time resident. Isn't that an interesting way to think about what happened? Every year there's this gigantic conveyor belt that brings people here by the thousands. Not just those of us who come here for vacations or because we like to be here for a while, but those who work here during the season. They're on that conveyor belt too. They come and go every year as what are known as circular migrants. They may live in other countries, other parts of the world. We have people who come here from Bulgaria every year, coming here for 10 or 12 years working in landscaping. And then we have some of them who fall off that conveyor belt, and we have a thriving Bulgarian community. We have people here from Nepal. And it's the same kind of story. There's a common story that comes out of all this, and it's probably of interest to people like you.
Well, I was just going to say, what do
Yeah.
you call those people that do not come here on that belt, that marries a Nantucket native and move here and never leave?
That's a special kind of arrangement. That wasn't a belt phenomenon. That was a that can happen too. But that's a phenomenon that's noteworthy. But I don't think it's that common. I don't think it's not what's bringing so many people here who come here by choice. I mean, in a sense, it is a choice. It's a choice to say, I want to make my life here, not only with this person, but in this place. And what I found noteworthy about Nantucket today is just how many of us have been drawn to this community as year-round residents, not only from across America, but really from across the world. It's, you may not appreciate it, but there aren't a whole lot of places in the United States that look the way Nantucket does. Nantucket is really a miniature immigration entry port. If you think about the major immigrant entry ports in the United States, Southern California, Los Angeles, Boston has been an immigrant entry port. Certainly Chelsea continues to be an immigrant entry port. There aren't that many places, although they're beginning to materialize here and there, and it happens kind of by chance. Pioneer migrants settle there. Sometimes you get refugee populations, all of whom are directed through some church group to settle in, let's say, St. Paul, Minnesota, and then you have a thriving community of people, all of whom come from some other part of the planet where they were trying to leave because life was terrible and they were desperate. So this past year, I've worked with the Nantucket data platform to better understand this whole process of people coming and people going over the course of the year. And I don't know how many of you have heard of the Nantucket data platform. Raise your hand. A couple. Okay, you pretty well, some of you are familiar with it. And today I want to share with you a bit of what we've learned about all these folks who are on this conveyor belt here on the island for a week or a month, and how they have become attached to Nantucket. And Carolyn, if you can, you have the thing fired up here, and if we could turn the lights down. I'm just going to scroll through very briefly some of the introductory slides here. This is someone else's presentation, but I want to get to the heart of it. Basically, the Nantucket data platform, as you see, it says it's big data for a small island. And this was founded by Alan Worden, one of the realtors here, who's really taken a big step forward in trying to transform Nantucket, as small as it is, into a smart community, like a smart city. And the premise is that we become smarter and stronger when the leaders whom we elect and look up to make decisions based on evidence rather than politics alone. So we have the next slide. We've been asking leaders, are you sure you got the right data to make the decisions? We've asked the selectmen, finance committee. A lot of times they say, we don't have the right data, we wish we did. And this is kind of a massive concern because it's not easy to get the right data to make the decisions you have to make about capital investments, sewers, et cetera, et cetera. So the Nantucket data platform is designed to help. The idea is to assemble a skilled data team and to have the kinds of methods you need to have to answer the questions that we have locally. And then to have what we talk about as what we call visualizations that tell the story. And this is viewed here on Nantucket as a public utility, something that people can access and they can say, we need to know this about something. And in this case, we're talking about a library of answers that can make Nantucket smarter and stronger. And probably the first volume that we're filling in here is going to be an answer to a question that was posed by our first client. And that was Remain, the Schmidt Family Foundation, which has done a lot of good things for Nantucket. And the question they posed is, so how many people are there here on Nantucket? What's the population? We go to the Census Bureau and they say, well, it's 11,387 people by our estimate. And you say, well, how do you know that? And they say, well, we took a census back in 2010 and we've got this black magic methodology that allows us to extrapolate and outward and project, so it must be about that many people. And then Catherine Stover, our beloved town clerk, who passed away about a half a year ago, said, well, you say it's 11,000 and I can put a name and a face on a whole lot more than that. There's a whole lot more people here who have proven to me that they are certifiably official residents of Nantucket. That is to say, their driver's license says they live on Nantucket. They pay their taxes from an address on Nantucket. The IRS comes after them on Nantucket. That's where they live. And they have a motor vehicle registered here, so how come you didn't catch them? The answer is, well, the last time we took a census in 2010, so we're just kind of assuming that things have been going up according to a rate that we estimate. And we all know that they just don't have it right. They have it right for 95% of the communities in the United States. I'm not bad-mouthing the Census Bureau, but they have a standard way of doing it, and they do it, and it's one size fits just about all, but we're way out of the limits of that size. So what we did is we said, well, let's devise a new methodology for estimating what we refer to as the effective population. And the effective population, when you think about it, it's not just the people who are full-time or are officially resident on Nantucket. I mean, that's an important component. But there's a whole lot of other bodies on the island who are creating traffic and generating trash. And, just because they don't live here year-round doesn't mean that they don't have the impact that a human being has when present on Nantucket. And we started out with a real simple classification. We have the permanent residents. That would correspond to what we call the census population, the people who are officially permanent residents of Nantucket. And then we've got a lot of people who are seasonal residents, and you know what that means. That means they could be seasonally here during the season, or it could be that they have a second home here, and a lot of our homes are second homes. And they may come here again and again and again throughout the year. They may come a couple times in the late spring. They may come during the summer, or they may rent their house out during the summer, and they may come in the fall. But we have seasonal residents, and their patterns of presence on the island, vary. It depends on how they live their lives and how close they are. We have year-round commuters, the folks who get on the early boat, come over here with hammers and tools and do construction. We have seasonal workers who arrive here just prior to the season or at the beginning of the season and may work 2 or 3 jobs in restaurants and basically in hospitality. to handle the seasonal surge of visitors to Nantucket. And then we have the visitors, and they range from people who get off the boat and they look around and they say, oh, so this is Nantucket. I'm going to be here this afternoon, then I'm going to go to the vineyard. And, you know, these are the people who are kind of wandering around on the streets, crossing, you know, as pedestrians, and we, you know, just kind of wandering people, first timers. Or they may be here for a week, or they may be here for a couple weeks. A lot of different patterns. So all of these people are the effective population. And as you can imagine, the sheer numbers fluctuate and vary according to a seasonal pattern that we all can appreciate qualitatively. But the question is, how do you put numbers on these people? How do you know roughly how many there are? And the example I like to use is, well, if you're here in the middle of July and you have, let's say, 500 people who are leaving on a ferry, one or another ferry between, let's say, 11 o'clock and 1:30, and another 500 who are arriving between the same period of time, demographer would say, well, let's see, we got 500 left and 500 arrived. One child was born at the hospital, nobody died, so we have a net change in population of one person. But you've had 1,000 people transacting business coming and going, and that's why there's so much traffic downtown. So demographically, you're missing everything if you just say, well, how did the population change in the last 24 hours? One person was born, nobody died. We say, well, that's a natural increase of +1. Nobody moved here as a permanent resident, but a whole lot of people came and went. And how do you tell what those numbers are? So let's start with the next slide here. And this is going to give you a visual idea of how we deal with this. We start out with the town clerk's street list that says, right now we can identify 11,000 adults. Then we go to the credit, a credit agency-like place that says, we found some other people who look like they live on Nantucket, Civis Analytics. They found 3,200 other people, put them together and say, well, we got our town list, we got the Civis Analytics that adds 3,200 more to that 11,000. So we figure there are about 14,200 adults, as best as we can tell, live here as our year-round our full-time residents officially. We got to figure out how many children there are. We don't keep track of children. We don't have public access to children, but we can estimate them. So we come up with a permanent resident population of about 17,200 people, give or take a few hundred. That's 2017, our best estimate. Remember, the Census Bureau says 11,000 and change. We say it's more like 17,200. We don't know for sure if it's more or less, but it sure isn't 11,000. And we've got these color-coded here so you can see the street list, which is shown in red and green on the outer fringe. These are the people that the town clerk has really identified and have certified that they are year-round residents, which means they can get the discount on the car ferry and all the other entitlements that you get as a resident. And then on the inner side, we've got the blue and tan, which are the number of children we estimate if there are that many permanent adult residents, and we can do that with a reasonable degree of accuracy because we know that there are lots of families here that have children. And then the blue and the pink, these are people who have left an economic footprint. That is to say, they have a bank account or they are engaging in financial transactions that suggest that it looks like they live here. Their credit card address is Nantucket, so if you have to figure out where they live, Nantucket is the likeliest place. Okay, Now we're going to see the next visualization, which is Nantucket's effective population as we estimate it over the course of a year, just to give you an overview picture. And we're going to start out with a big circle that shows you the way we display the numbers. And these are all numbers that we gather. They're translated from, we're really looking at mobile devices, all the cell phones in people's pockets that are transmitting information. And what we can tell is not anything about you as a cell phone carrier, but we can tell where the crowds are. We can get a rough idea of scaling up how many people there are based on how many cell phones are connected at any point in time. If you look around the top of that, you see January on the top, go over to the right, and then December over there. Now, this is showing you how many people are on Nantucket January and February, and that's pretty much just those of us who live here. And then comes March Madness, and there is a 12% increase in population. And then we have Daffodil Weekend. You see that little spike there on around 4 o'clock. We have a 20% increase just that weekend. Then we head into the beginning of the season, and you can see another spike, which weekend is that, Caroline? That's
Fagawi.
Fagawi. Now, you get into July, we're getting very near the peak. July 4th, 33% more people on island. And then we have in August, it's off the charts, we have all sorts of stuff going on.
It's the Boston Pops.
The Boston Pops,
was the
right?
Single biggest day.
Right, and then at the end of August, right at the beginning of September, all the people who are here with children go home, and what's left are the people who are in the child-free stage of life. All right, and they're here in September. It goes on, and you see those spikes, and then we have Christmas stroll, one more blast, 23% increase, and that's the pattern that we all know is out there, but now you see we can put some rough numbers on it. So if you want to know how many people there are or how much the number of bodies on the island on a given day increased, this is the pattern that we can come up with. And as I say, it's the crowd estimated from all the cell phones that are connecting at any moment in time, and we can tell you that with the number of cell phone and mobile device connections, we can estimate how many carriers of those devices are on island. Now, here's another visualization here's some interesting things that we learned. One thing is that there's a myth around that New York fans outnumber Boston fans, and in fact, there is a peak of New Yorkers here, but the Boston fans actually outnumber the New York fans at any given time of the year. Next we have, this is a really interesting one, favorite beaches. We're able to identify not only the favorite beaches based on sheer numbers, but we can identify the people from different parts of the country who are here who favor one beach over another. And one of the things we discovered, if I remember correctly, is that there are a lot of beaches where the number of people who are sitting there at any given time during the summer will be disproportionately from one place or another. People from New Canaan, they tend to hang out at Cisco, from Darien at Surfside, Fairfield at Nobadir. We got a lot of people from Atlanta who come to Nantucket, and they go to Sconset. So I have a friend, I used to work at Cape Air, and this guy was going to set up a food truck. He wanted to go to these different beaches. I said, listen, I got one thing I want to tell you. You're going to have two different kinds of cuisine. The kind of stuff that people from Atlanta like, good old Southern food. If you're going to Sconset, any of the other beaches, you want to have the regular fare. So that's some guidelines, practical guidelines for a small business person starting out. Now, here's an interesting one about shopping times. We all know what it's like during the summer to go to the Stop and Shop. And this is this is classified information, okay? We can't let this out. You don't ever tell this to people who are renting your house or people who are visiting during the summer. What we find is that Nantucketers already know that the time to shop in August or July is between 6 a.m. or between 6 and 10 a.m. or 6 and 10 p.m. because visitors are going to crowd the place between 10 and 2. And some of us go there between 2 and 6, but the time to avoid the crowds, the secret, we can discern this just by figuring out whether those cell phones that are in that place during the day happen to be cell phones that spend most of their nights on Nantucket, or we're spending most of their nights some other place off island. The off islanders are the ones who show up between 10 and 2 p.m. especially, and then between 2 and 6 along with us, so we can differentiate them. And as I say, this is classified information. So what's next? We are, in the Nantucket data platform is trying to take this kind of information that we have and address a whole range of questions about tourism, about the 2020 census, about healthcare, about affordable housing. We can pick out where there are crowded conditions across Nantucket. Lots of cell phones in what looks like a two-family housing unit, and it looks like you got 20 people who live there. Government finance, we may be able to show that there are more people here for particular programs than the government credits us with, and so we can get more financing. More about traffic, behavioral health, and we're also trying to set up a survey panel where we can kind of interview people over the year and just kind of get quantitative information in the same way that you get kind of polls about how one or another political candidate is doing over time, you know, just a sampling to say what's going on here, how do people feel about one thing or another. Now, I think next we have, what are we going to show next? See what comes up. This is a great video, and before you start it, Carolyn, let me just explain. What we're going to show here is what we know about Nantucket on a typical day in July, was it? Typical day in July in 2017.
It's an average of the 4 Saturdays in July.
An average of the 4 Saturdays in July, and this is all based on the mobile device data. And this is the kind of picture that we can tell. Upper right, it says it's just about 6 a.m. in the morning, and you see the little counter, the population going up or down, or people coming and going. 38.6 thousand people. You see how that counter's going up?
The blue and the green are ferries coming in and out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And this is the density of where people are, the red dots. Ferries leaving.
And now you see the planes start coming in.
Planes coming in. We've got 39,000 people on island, and they're going up.
Now you see all the visitors coming in.
This is where people are flying to and flying from.
So there's a lot in Florida, a lot in New England, as to be expected, but there's quite a few coming from Texas and also California. Big numbers coming in and out. And this is the local view. You can see all the ferries, and there's more than we even kind of realize. There's dozens and dozens of ferries. Places like New Bedford, not just the Hyannis. Alan says when he saw that New Bedford ferry pop up, he knew we were really capturing the real data.
Right. So now it's noonish, and you can see how in a summer afternoon, people are spread out all over the island. They're enjoying the beaches. A lot of people downtown, but also a lot of people on the beaches.
So it ends at 1. But if we were to
Yeah.
continue this, you'll see Nantucket start lighting up in the evening for the sunsets. Town gets really busy around 7, 8
Right.
p.m. Everyone's heading downtown for dinner.
And you see that third bar in the upper right, it says 40,467 population. There are roughly 40,000 plus bodies on island at that time of day on the average, what was it, Saturday?
Saturday.
Saturday. And remember, that compares to our estimate of 17,000 or so people who are official residents of Nantucket. So at that particular time of the year, on those kinds of days in July, we who reside here are outnumbered by twice as many, more than twice as many bodies on island who are doing things and who are generating the tourist economy that we have. We know where they come from, we know where they spend most of their time because that's where their cell phone was most of the month before. And we can actually, if we work the numbers a different way, we can trace where people go on the island. We can say, you arrived on a ferry, and then what did you do? You went to Sconset, or you went to Nantucket, and then you did something else later in the day, and it's not you, it's just crowds of people going to one place or another. And this is kind of like a breakthrough methodology that the data platform has devised. And we're now in the process, I should say it's really Alan Worden is in the process of showing other communities that if we can figure out how this method works on Nantucket, calibrated, really well calibrated, because there are no freeways that connect us, we're isolated, and we can track everybody who gets here either by ferry or by aircraft, or unless they canoe over. We know where they came from.
Private boats.
Or private boats. We can calibrate our numbers and we can go into other communities and say, if you'd like to know how many people are, let's say, arriving in Grand Central Station in New York, where they came from and where they went, and how your population is changing during the day with all the commuters coming in, we can do the same thing anywhere. And so it becomes a nifty way of exploiting the data based on the experience we have. So that's basically what I have to say, and this is a little pitch that Alan uses to talk to the mayors of cities that are considering using this, and he says, what are your pressing questions? How do you want to, how can we help you get the evidence and the data that will help you make informed evidence-based decisions instead of guessing about what's happening?
And it applies to you too. I mean,
Yeah.
What are your pressing questions? What are the things that are important to the island, important to you? What are the things you'd like to see us do? If you articulate a clear, compelling, pressing question, it then makes it a lot easier to find that answer. A lot of people expect us to start with the data, but you don't want to start with the data, you want to start with what you're trying to figure out, and then use the data to answer that question.
And we invite you to ask those questions, bring those questions to the attention of the select board members, because they know about this and they are, I would say, quite enthusiastic about the prospect of being able to tap into this kind of methodology and these answers. And the data platform is interested in seeing this kind of an approach get applied to our community first and foremost. So thank you for your attention. I have, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Maybe we have the lights on too. Thank you.
She's got a question right there.
Good. Who'd like to start? Who's got a question? Yes.
My question is, are you working with waste options for the landfill and actually looking at numbers? They're talking about doing a new plant and a whole new schedule of whatever they're doing out there with the composting and sending the demolition off island. And it would be interesting, I think, for us to see how much trucking is coming in with all the wastewater sewerage and what the activity really is before they go ahead and do a new building.
Yeah.
I can answer that one.
Go ahead.
We're talking with the DPW, with Rob and Graham, And we're very interested, and the select board is very interested in doing some sort of study around solid waste and recycling and what that picture really, really looks like. So we're in talks right now. There's a lot of questions to be answered. You know, how do we make sure our recycling is efficient, ensure we're getting the most use out of our composter, encouraging, you know, the public and the community to make smart decisions when it comes to solid waste and recycling. So that's a really rich source, and we're definitely exploring that.
Well, I was wondering, I didn't see it on your list, but are the schools at all interested in your projections about, you know, population increases of school-age children? And do you have access to their enrollment figures and so on? So
I can take this.
and then
Yeah, sure.
estimate, knowing all the new families and the births and so on, to get an idea of whether they need to build more space for the children.
Now, Carolyn can answer that, yeah.
It's really important for the schools to use actual numbers and projections to guide their strategic planning. For a lot of this work, the predictive work is really important because we can look at what's happening now, and if we can accurately predict in the future, you know, 1, 5, 10 years down the road, what's likely to happen, we can plan better. One of the things that we hear is, you know, the second the new school was built, it was too small. So we're meeting with the school system. We had a meeting last week with Mike Kozor and Peter Cohen to explore with them how we can help, and they're very interested in predictive modeling for numbers of students.
Yes, sir.
Two questions which the select board discusses and argues about every single night they meet. And that's boozing and traffic. You must be working with traffic.
Yep. We're working with Mike Burns, the transportation planner. We're looking at traffic, specifically congestion around the island. What are the hot spots? What causes those? Other issues are modal splits. So are people driving? Are they biking? Are they walking? Getting an understanding of what kinds of methods of transportation people are using in order to kind of look at how that's affecting the island and maybe sway people one way or the other. You know, increasing bike usage, for example. And then parking is another one. Obviously, we have a big parking problem here, particularly in the summers. So we're looking at ways to track that, understanding, you know, what the turnover is, how long people are waiting for spots, and using that kind of understand the situation better and plan going forward.
There's a really nice fit between what the data platform is doing and what Mike Burns is doing in conjunction with a team of Worcester Polytech students who were here this year, and actually it builds on work of a team that was here last year. So we're kind of on the forefront of informing the select board about exactly what we know and what could be little baby steps forward based on a lot of information that we have about, you know, basically the problem that we have every summer. And there are ways to mitigate this. It's just that we are, you know, we haven't come out of the 19th century in a sense, and we don't want to have meters on the, you know, we don't want to have signs and all this stuff. And there is technology out there now that catapults you into an entirely new arena where you can find solutions for the congestion and parking we have without really impacting the downtown historic nature of the historic district at all. Nothing that's really visible. As just a way of saying, you know, we need to have a process that makes it the case that parking places are being freed up all the time, and if you just drive through once, you'll run into one, instead of saying you got to drive through 10 times and you got to be there within 5 seconds of one being emptied out before somebody takes it. That's kind of the stress level, and we've got that quantified, and there are solutions in place, and I can tell you that this is what I think is going to be one of the big success stories going forward if we just kind of tinker with the right dials and make things work. And the data platform is really informing us a lot about what this looks like, you know, what we have to do.
Peter, is there any way to predict
with this method, when the island has had enough people, enough new houses, enough everything, or is that just too subjective?
Well, I don't think it's too subjective. I have my own view on it, and this is my own view, and I think we all recognize that there is a population ceiling out there somewhere. There's a limit to how many people can live on Nantucket or be on Nantucket. And I like to say, you know, the model you start with is roughly the same acreage as Manhattan. That's the outer limit. So how far do you want to go back from that to some number? We're at 17,000. Manhattan is, you know, what it is. And my sense is that given the fact that we've got at least half of our acreage in public trust, there's the other half that's left, and there isn't very much of it left where you can build anything. All we can do is increase density, and we have to acknowledge as a community that there is an upper limit, and we have to reach a consensus on what we would like to establish as our target upper limit and say we don't want it to go much more than that. And then we have to figure out a dynamic way to sustain our population at that limit. And looking at it as a demographer, I say, well, that would come about, first of all, most fundamentally from, you have the same number of people dying as are being born. That's one, you know, equation, but that's hypothetical. The same number of people who want to move here and do move here, replacing people who leave. How does that happen? Well, you got to live in a house. So one way of handling it is simply to say, there are so many places to live on this island, and there are occupancy rules that govern it, and if we don't build any more housing units or we don't increase the density, then there won't be places for people to live. But that kind of affects the native-born Nantucketers' children who say, well, I want to go off to college, but I want to be able to come back. I can't afford to live here anymore. So we got to figure out how to handle that. But there is, I think, in principle, the possibility of a dynamic equilibrium whereby some of those who are born on Nantucket pursue their fortunes in Manhattan and Silicon Valley and in the rest of the United States, the rest of the world, and they go away and they become very successful and very wealthy. And we say, come back when you're 35 or 40 or 45 and you want to move back to Nantucket, form a line there and see how many millions of dollars you have accumulated and buy a house. For those who go off to college and say, I want to come back, I want to just be able to live on Nantucket and be a carpenter, a plumber, or a school teacher, or whatever, we have to have some way to make that happen. And that has to be affordable housing. And the most affordable housing, of course, is your parents' house. But there still has to be a way for it to be possible for those who were born here, grew up here, and said, you know, I think I'm entitled to be able to come back to my hometown and teach here or serve the population here. And we have to figure that out. I don't have an answer, but I think there is an answer. And that's kind of the outlines of how I see it, but that's my own personal view, and of course I'm a wash ashore. But it seems to me that people who were born here and want to go off to college, want to be able to come back and make their life here and have a family here, ought to have some kind of an entitlement. In America, the way they turn off growth in communities that they want to stop growth in is they stop issuing building permits or sewer permits. They say you can't build a house without a building permit, and there aren't any more permits left. So go down the road into the next community and go live there, and you can commute to work here. We don't have any way to commute to work from down there. You have to take a ferry, and that's not really what we want. So that's one person's view, and I'm not saying it should be that way, but we have to reach a consensus as a community how we want to deal with this problem. And if we talk about it for a few years and come to a consensus and say, this is how we want the future to unfold, then it translates into actions about, you know, where the densification stops and where we say, that's going to be it.
Peter, given everything that you just talked about, I think you've done that real well. Do you ever look at it from the standpoint of the glass being half full, or half empty, I should say? And as Malcolm Gladwell talks about in his books, would there ever be, and I'm asking your opinion, a tipping point where the economics just don't make any sense, and a disparity between the haves and the have-nots really don't make any sense? It just gets more and more and more disparate. Would there ever be, do you have a gut feel for how far away that would be? And I guess what's in my head is, nobody saw the Great Depression happen. But when that happened,
Until it happened.
the population went from roughly
Yeah.
12,000 to 2,300 and stayed there for a long
Yeah.
time. And nobody could have foreseen what happened after World War II, which explains, according to some experts, why when people came back here after 1950 particularly, they found a wealth of old homes without one window being broken, because people moved off and came back. And the populations since then have remained relatively stable, I think, until the last several years. And Kathy and I talk about this a lot, where could it happen in the not too distant future, where this becomes a land of the super haves and everybody else is excluded, and you just simply, there's only just so much Nantucket, and you simply can't, despite density
Yeah.
changes and all. What's your view about all that?
Well, my own view is it's kind of a variant of the tipping point view that you're articulating. I don't know the answer to your question about I don't know of any precedent to look at and say, well, we saw what happened there and it could happen here. What I do know, what I do believe, and I'm not what I'm talking now is not about the haves and the have-nots, where the have-nots simply have to disappear. What I do see is that Nantucket is an exceptional place. I mean, I know why it's exceptional, because it drew me here. And I do see an ominous future ahead if we don't recognize that insofar as we start to gravitate toward the Hamptons type situation, where you say, well, it's where all the rich and famous go, it's the place to be, but it's not what it used to be. It doesn't attract the kind of people who come to Nantucket, which I think is a very different segment. Then we're going to become like lots of other places, and we will have lost what to me was unique about Nantucket. And to me, that's what I'm concerned about. And I think it's inextricably tied to the total number of people who live on the island. There has to be the community as we know it now maintained sort of the way it is, possibly enriched by washashores who come here, but many of them who come here for a special reason, and they participate in the community, and they get connected to it, and they respect what Nantucket not only was but is, and they don't want it to become like other places. That's my own, again, feeling. And I'm searching for a way, you know, looking at it demographically, I'm searching sort of for the magic formula of saying, gee, if just enough of our adult children decided to pursue their fortunes elsewhere in the world, because we've got a global economy and there is a big draw. They get educated. I love Nantucket, but I got to go out in the world for 30 years. If just enough of them went away, we could say, well, maybe that would offset just enough the remaining amount of Nantucket that we want to be populated by people who weren't here but are going to be here over the next 5 or 10 years. And I'd like for that to sort of be a process that tapers off and maybe says, well, if you did the mathematics of it, you might end up not with 17,000 people, but 22,000 people. And then it just kind of hovered around 22,000 because people were coming, people were going. Got a lot of people who move here in pre-retirement. They contribute a lot to the island, not only financially, but in terms of taxes they pay, but also in terms of the volunteer effort they make. They're not going to be around forever. There will be an orderly process of demographic, renewal through birth and mortality. And if somehow that balance could be maintained so that we say, we just hovers around there, that would be really great. And I've talked to a couple of demographer friends of mine. I said, is there any way you can figure this out mathematically if I gave you some sense of how it works? They said, yeah, tell us how it's working. We can put some mathematics around it. And that's about as far as I've gotten with this problem right now.
What I've noticed in the last 20 years, and I come from a very different background from almost everybody. I'm an Army brat. I've been moving since the day I was born. What I see here that is so distinctive about Nantucket are the enormous number of people whose parents are here, whose grandparents are here, whose great-grandparents either are or were here, whose great-great-grandparents were here, people who can tell you about what was going on this island in 1918 and 1916, and they have this. No other place that I've lived in the United States has a sort of captive population like the one I've seen here. Now, I suspect if I would go down to Mississippi to live, I might find that kind of residual familial situation. But what I see here is nothing like what I've seen anywhere else I've lived.
I fully agree. I mean, Nantucket is a unique place, and I've come to appreciate its uniqueness. And I personally, speaking for myself, have been converted to the point of view that a point of view I didn't hold before. I didn't have a different point of view. I just didn't have any point of view. But I have a point of view now, which is that I really do believe that we are sort of near a tipping point, and I would really like to see action taken, and I'd like to see a consensus reached by everybody who comes to town meeting and votes that we really want to keep it a special place. And I think the richness of the families here, and I would extend what you said to say the kinds of families that you have here now are not just the ones that we think of going back generations with the stereotypes of the people who reflect our past, but there's a whole basis of immigrant settlers who have come here over the last 20, 30, 40 years. And I give you a personal anecdote. How many of you know that there is a strong connection between Nantucket and Mississippi through the drug trafficking, right? Raise your hand. We all know that. The police all know it. And all of the people here on Nantucket, virtually all of them, trace to a tiny community in the heart of the Mississippi Delta, Rosedale, Mississippi.
Right.
And I have actually been in Rosedale, Mississippi. I was taken on a tour of the Mississippi Delta by another demographer who was there when they were conducting the 1950 census, and he was the team leader. And he took me all around there. And when I got to Nantucket, I kept running into people who were reading about people from Rosedale, Mississippi. I said, the place has only got 2,000 residents. How are all these people coming to Rosedale, to Nantucket from Rosedale? And I found out more about it because I had the good fortune to participate in the NHA's oral history project, where you go out and take oral histories from people. I said, I'm going to volunteer to take oral histories from people who have moved here, immigrants, and maybe people from Mississippi, if I can find who the original pioneer migrant was. Well, I find out who he was. He works for the DPW. He's one of the managers there, and I talked to him for about an hour. He told me about having moved here maybe 20, 25 years ago, and then some other people from Rosedale, and they heard that you don't have to live in abject poverty in Rosedale. You can come to Nantucket and earn a decent living. And then it transformed into, you can earn a really good living if you bring drugs to Nantucket by the next generation. So that's how that happened. But there were a whole lot of people here from Rosedale. I've got some figures here from the town census that tell you who else is here. We all know that we have a lot of people from El Salvador. We have Jamaicans. We also have a large community of Brazilians. We have a very large community of Bulgarians who have been here for, I'm not sure who the pioneer migrant was, but there's quite a population. We have people here from Nepal. We have people here from Russia, Thailand, Sweden. We've got, not 2 digits, but 1 digit. We got 37 people from Ireland. That sounds like maybe an echo of the past. And, it's quite an eclectic group of people. And the cuisine, the cuisines are out there. And, this is how different cultures meet. They first meet through their cuisines. That's what makes it so special. So I think of that as these are really the fundamental, valuable assets that we have on Nantucket. And if we can just kind of keep it sort of, keep the temperature around in the range that we like, don't overwhelm us with the world wants to come here or move here. And keep in mind that, if you don't fit in here, go to the Hamptons. That's a great place to spend your summer. There are a lot of people there. You can fly in on your helicopter, whatever you want to do. That's my philosophy. That's what I value.
Peter, I started planning my book, The Other Islanders, back in the 70s, and it was my planned retirement project. And my intent was that public history, in my view, was very narrowly focused, and sort of Quakers and whales, I called it. And I wanted through the book to expand it so that somebody in public schools would see their parents, maybe their grandparents, in the book. So I started collecting information in the 70s and 80s, but I couldn't really write the book until I came home. I started working on it in 1999. And in 2005, we gave a copy of the book to every single student in Nantucket High School. So Barbara White introduced it, and she asked the students sitting in the assembly, how many of you were born here? And, a sea of hands went up. And then she said, and how many of you, your parents were born here? And hands went up, and grandparents, and a few less hands each time. Well, about 5 years after the publication of the book, I was doing a slide presentation about the schools. And in just that short time, there had been an enormous turnover. I took pictures for the slideshow with Brazilians, Jamaicans. Our school population had been transformed in the course of maybe 5 years. And in a way, my book was out of date because I didn't write about Bulgarians. I wrote about Jamaicans. The Nepalese were not even, a point on the horizon.
Yeah.
So I basically said, well, this is for somebody else to do. What's happened since the publication of that book? But things have changed enormously in our schools, and I assume that that's a reflection of an enormous change in our year-round population.
Yeah. There's a very interesting angle on this which I'd like to extend. I mean, there really has been to a demographer, it's a fascinating transformation to see all of the students in school who come from all over the world now. And the interesting thing is that when you start to look in the Inky in the last page about newborns and about people who, kids who reach their first birthday, look at the names and look at who they're related. About half of them are basically native-born Nantucketers who are first generation, children of immigrants. And before our very eyes, the future is creeping in on tiny feet. Our next generation of Nantucket kids who are going to say, I'm a native-born Nantucketer, I want to come back, I want to live here, are going to be from all these different places I've listed. And as a matter of fact, there was, I don't know if you remember 2 years ago, every year we have a thing, the Inky says, the first newborn was so-and-so, and the happy parents and the picture of the mother in the hospital with a big smile. Well, 2 years ago, the first newborn was born to somebody that I knew when I was working at the airport, Noe Pinata, who is one of those El Salvadoran immigrants who made his way here at age 14. And he went through hell to get here. He damn near died on the way. I mean, he was one of those people who was a one-man caravan, trying to get in. He finally snuck across the border, got in, went to Boston, ended up in Nantucket, got a bride who joined him after several years here. He's the custodian at the airport. Short guy and always got a smile on his face, deeply religious, and he is deeply grateful. And the first newborn, it was either 2 or 3 years ago, they had a big picture of Noe and his wife and the newborn. And so, the future is unfolding before our eyes. Come back in 20 years and it's going to look a lot different.
Let me add something. There was for quite a long time a James Bradford Ames Fellowship. Every year somebody, sometimes more than one person, would get an Ames Fellowship and have a project. And Mrs. Ames had endowed it for studies of people of African American, Cape Verdean, or Wampanoag heritage in Nantucket and nearby. So a few years ago, a woman from the South, Jasmine Waddell, got an Ames Fellowship, and her plan was to study Cape Verdeans in New Bedford and Cape Verdeans on Nantucket and their sense of identity as Cape Verdeans. Was a big difference because in New Bedford there is a continual refreshment of Cape Verdeans, whereas in Nantucket that refreshment ended at least 2 generations ago.
Really? Yeah.
And what Jasmine discovered, and it wasn't what she was expecting, is that whereas in New Bedford Cape Verdeans, young Cape Verdeans identified as Cape Verdeans, in Nantucket the us versus them wasn't Cape Verdeans versus non-Cape Verdeans. It was those of us who were born and grew up here versus those of you who have come recently. And the whole sense of identity was entirely different from what she was finding on the mainland. And I really feel sure that, as you say, as time passes, every generation that is born on the island and grows up on the island is going to feel that they have a just right in this place, and they're always going to be suspicious of these next people who are coming.
That's what you get for living on an island. See, Frances, I will tell you that you can hear Frances talking about this. She's not a demographer, but she has the soul of a demographer, and she's thinking about the world the way demographers think about it. Generational replacement, what we call cohort succession. And the way that happens here versus everywhere else, because we are on an island, and that generation is solidified to this place in a way that is very unusual. And to me, that's fascinating. I mean, this is something that academic folks get really excited about. They say, look at the difference between what happens if you grow up on an island. It's kind of like the Galapagos Islands. It's different species of human beings here. You know, they think differently, and they look inward rather than outward. It really shapes our life in ways that we're not aware of until people start collecting data and they publish articles. They will look what happened on this island, and to the human beings there.
Is there any group who's interested in, let's just say, a task force on tipping point? I'm very concerned about the downtown and what's happening. And, you know, stores are closing. Year-round stores are closing. I would think it would be a natural for it to remain.
I'm sure it would be. I'm sure it is. And you're getting into sort of the economics of how you keep a tourist destination going with the ever-increasing inflation of prices where, you know, the rentals that stores have to pay. That's not kind of my expertise, but to me, it's a really thorny, complicated problem, but it is a problem that we should recognize and say, this is happening here. How are we going to agree on what we're going to do about it? I mean, one way to deal with it is to simply, you know, say, what are we going to do about places that cannot conduct business downtown anymore because the rents are too expensive? You can talk to two flavors of economists, and you know they'll give you opposite stories about what you should do. I don't know what the answer to that is, but it is a concern. And I keep coming back to the same notion that if we can recognize the core of the problem that we're facing with the tipping point idea and say, look, we can't just let things unfold incrementally. There's a term for that. I think it's called disjointed incrementalism. It's like every little decision you make, well, okay, we did that, and we'd do that, and we'd do that, but is anybody looking at what is going to happen with that decision? Is that moving us in a direction we want to go, or is it moving us in the opposite direction? And I think examining those decisions that are made, particularly the zoning decisions that are made at annual town meeting, the things that we say, yeah, I don't understand what they want to do with that property, but I'm not opposed to it. Well, we don't have any basis for knowing whether we should like it or not like it, because nobody tells us, is this moving us in a direction we want to go or in exactly the opposite direction? And, you know, it's a really complicated problem, and I just hope we can, as a community, recognize that we need to decide what our future should be, and we need to decide, you know, what things are happening every year, little decisions that are moving us toward or away from what we want.
And I can add to that. On the small business side of it, we're working with the chamber to understand what are the concerns. We just had a small business workshop with about 10 business owners across different industries, and we explored with them, like, what are the biggest challenges you're facing? What are your concerns going forward? So things like, you know, staffing appropriately, preparing for an eventual, you know, financial downturn, you know, understanding customer profiles, where people are coming from, how they shop, where they shop, trying to figure out, do they stay open later in the season? Do they close? What's, you know, financially viable? So they have a lot of concerns, obviously. And so we're speaking with them and trying to figure out where we can help.
You might tell them about the rainy day stuff about staffing. I mean, these are little things that the data platform has shown us. We can tell local merchants and businesses about phenomena that we can document that will help them kind of curtail their expenses to some degree.
Yeah, so for example, if you're a small business owner and you have a shop downtown and you're trying to figure out, one, whether to stay open like later in the day, and two, whether to stay open later in the season, a lot of it is dependent on your customers, when they're coming, when they're shopping. So a lot of small businesses are starting to understand those flows and starting to look at that. But what they don't see is the impact of other factors. So things like the weather, for example. And so what we're trying to do is look at historical flows of business combined with visitor numbers combined with the weather to say, oh, look, the forecast this week says the weekend's going to be rainier, so you're going to have more business downtown, so we might want to justify putting 2 more staff members on that day. So there's a lot that you can do, and there's a lot that once you look at the data, our data scientists can see those patterns, and they can see the patterns across all sorts of different factors. And so it gets, like you mentioned earlier, the predictive work gets really, really interesting in helping people plan. Because if they make the wrong decisions, it can be pretty devastating for a small business. If a business stays open through October, November to make it to stroll, but all of a sudden there's a snowstorm and the numbers for stroll are down 30%, their revenue's down 30%, where 10% may make or break that season. So it's really important to be able to predict those things.
Yes, sir.
Are there any other places, islands, towns, historically, recently, that have sort of stopped and had a look, done the kind of thing that we're all sort of suggesting, that have examined what's going on in terms of population and traffic, all the rest of the things that we're considering, and actually made decisions and stopped things rather than let things just evolve or just root them around a little bit? In other words, the kind of thing that everybody's kind of thinking about, has that ever happened anywhere else? I don't know. I think it may be Catalina. I don't know if anything happened there.
I don't know the history of Catalina, and my answer would be I don't know enough to answer your question. I know some of the ski resorts in Colorado, one in particular that we benefited from, looking at what they had done. The only remarkable thing there was that they took affordable housing really seriously. They said, this place doesn't function if we don't have workers. So that community is big time into saying we're going to have affordable housing for the people for the workforce here, because they service those who bring the dollars in. Now, in our case, we look at it and say, well, yeah, we should be doing that, but we're an island, we don't have that much space, and affordable housing is, it's really dicey to do it on Nantucket and very expensive, but it is, in a sense, necessary for the community to somehow find a solution, because if you don't have the workers, eventually the people who come here say, I wanted to go to the restaurant, but there was nobody there to serve me, or I wanted to have an electrician or a carpenter, but there's nobody around, they can't afford to live here. So you can envision a horrible scenario where suddenly you run out of the people you need to run the economy, and it doesn't collapse, but it just shrinks. But I don't know of any place that has taken a big deep breath and said, we want to stop and think about this.
You reminded me, because a zillion years ago, this is cycled through, everyone's worried about it, and then we have to go about our business and then come back. But I remember many years ago, Aspen was examined a little bit, because they had a similar situation. The people in the town couldn't afford to live there, and they moved to the outskirts of town and sold their homes. Here, the outskirts are the Cape. There aren't any outskirts. Right. But some people had gone and visited those people and talked to them, and affordable housing was a huge part of that equation.
Yeah, Aspen.
And I'd forgotten about that till you mentioned it.
Yeah.
Aspen's big because, like us, they have a little bit of that geographic isolation. Instead of the ocean, it's the mountains. So they're really similar. And Breckenridge is another one.
Yeah.
They raised their affordable housing limit. For us, for shy affordable housing, it's 10%, right? And I believe they raised theirs to 25% to try to combat it. So
Jackson Hole is another one. Right there.
we have a lot of contacts in Jackson
I
Hole.
haven't been there, and I'm not intimate with it, but I've heard from anecdotally from various people that the service is diminished to the point, because the work is just went there, and you had to commute such long distances, that because the services went there, the quality is diminished, and people just quit going.
Right.
And that's what I had in the back of my head when we talked about tipping point. And there's another component too that I'm beginning to see more and more, Kathy and I talk a lot about in the last 5 years or so, of people who are cashing out. And that would even apply to us. The last thing we're thinking about is leaving Nantucket. But we've made ourselves considerate. And many times people have heard me say, when this place starts to look, feel, smell, act, and breathe like any other place you could be, then why am I still here when I can sell the property, which we worked so hard to work on, you know, 40 years or so, and go somewhere else, perhaps, hopefully, for a decent standard of living and put the money in my pocket. And as soon as I do that now, I've ratcheted up the system where this home that I might have kept here for whatever, and we don't have children, but some people do, so they leave it to their children and so on. But now I've ratcheted up by selling it to somebody else at a much higher economic rate. And that just accelerates the entire process. That point is what bothers me more than anything. People who all of a sudden say, I could be anywhere to put up with this nonsense, so I'm just going to sell my house and try something else before I finally die. And that's a kind of a defeatist, demoralizing way of looking at it. But to a lot of people I've spoken with, they're thinking about that.
Well, it gets us right back to what I talked about before we began, the fact that so many of us are here by choice rather than the lottery of birth. And, you know, if you get that cascading effect over, 10 years, you could see, we go from what we were to we transition down to something that we become just like everybody else, a wealthy enclave, but it's not what it was. And that to me really captures the concept of the tipping point. It's not a tipping point that happens in a 12-month period, but there is a lurking out there, a scenario. And I think when you mentioned Jackson Hole, there are, I guess, I haven't studied these, but there are precedents for this happening. And it's troubling. I mean, I just see the outcomes. I refer to the Hamptons and say, well, why would I ever want to go there? And it must have been a nice place sometime a long time ago, but I wouldn't want to live there.
The best place I've ever lived is right here. We come from Rhode Island, and I'd be a southern New Englander the rest of my life. I can't imagine leaving right now.
Right.
But it brings you up short. It has nothing to do with the kinds of people who are here. This mix we have, I think, is drop dead wonderful. The music, the cultures, the cuisine. I mean, I wouldn't want it any other way. But in a lot of ways, a lot of people are being left out of the main economic viability of it. And that's scary.
Well, we got a lot of local enthusiasts about Nantucket, and if we could just build on that enthusiasm and say, for all our differences, including those who are foreign immigrants among us, we want to keep the place the way it is and make it work. There's a lot going for those who've settled here from around the world. I've just been really, I'm always astonished at how even the police chief says, you guys may be undocumented, but that's not my job. If the feds come on the island, I'm not going to go pick them up and drive them around the island to go knock on your door. They're on their own. And the chief has said he's in favor of protecting people here regardless of whether or not they are citizens. Going to protect them and see that the law applies to those who live here regardless of who you are. And that speaks a lot for our community.
And so we're not really in the business of making policy decisions, right? I mean, there's lots of important issues that we're talking about and considering. And our goal really is to bring the data to light and show it to the decision makers and help them make evidence-based decisions and help people like you make evidence-based decisions.
You have to deal with facts.
Right.
Exactly. And so illuminate the landscape, light up that picture. And to the gentleman in the back, to your point before about our other communities doing this, you see a lot of communities, hiring data consultants and doing reports and projects and studies. But really what we're trying to do is build this platform that serves as a data repository, and it's an ongoing, sustained thing. So rather than having a consultant come in and do a project and that data goes stale
Yeah.
and is outdated, if we keep the data here, we keep utilizing it, we keep updating it, and we build on that resource going forward, it's going to be easier and easier to see the things that you need to see and make decisions based on hard, concrete facts.
Well, thank you very much for attending. I got a sticking around too.